And the next item of business is a statement by Hamza Yousaf on justice sector response, recovery and renewal. And the Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Hamza Yousaf for up to 10 minutes, please, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today I wish to take the opportunity to update this Parliament on how Scotland's justice system has responded to the challenges posed by COVID-19 and the next steps which will have to be taken to allow the system to recover and, importantly, renew. Reflecting on how challenging the past few months have been and the immense pressure everyone working in the justice sector is under and has been under, I'd like to start by paying tribute to the adaptability, to the resilience, to the hard work of everyone across all justice agencies and those on the front line for their response to the COVID-19 outbreak. The dedication, the commitment of those who make the wheels of justice turn have enabled Scotland's justice system to respond quickly to the significant challenges posed by COVID-19 outbreak. I'd also like to thank the people of Scotland for largely adhering to the measures that are in place to keep everyone safe. But COVID has not gone away, and I urge people to continue to comply with the essential public health measures to help us curb, to help us control and curtail the spread of this dangerous virus. Presiding Officer, we are under no illusions when we consider the major impact that COVID has had on the justice system. I want to highlight to members the key role of the National Justice Board to drive forward our recovery efforts as we move through each key phase as part of our 4-phase lockdown exit roadmap. The Justice Board, engaging with victims, legal profession and others, is overseeing the progress of activity to ensure the recovery, renewal and transformation of the justice system as we progress through and beyond our COVID-19 route map. This recognises that significant progress was made very quickly in response to the COVID-19 outbreak, and that should be regarded as the foundations for work still to be done. Lord Advocate and I co-chaired the Victims Task Force last week, and we heard from members the importance they attach to being involved in the development of these changes. There were also some very clear anxieties from victims' organisations, which we are determined to act upon. The approach recognises that transformation across the system has been accelerated to enable essential business to be conducted in the early stages of the outbreak. That substantial work is ongoing to re-establish service provision, obviously in line with public health guidance, and that further extensive transformation will be required to enable the system to operate while living with the implications of COVID-19 going forward. I'll now turn to some of the more specific detail of what's happening across various justice agencies. In terms of police and police enforcement, the police have been at the front line and on the front line in this emergency, supporting one of the most effective tools we have to control the spread of the virus, namely physical distancing. There have been very good levels of compliance because almost, I think, every individual knows that this is a collective endeavour. And we know that the public has been very supportive of the way in which police have dealt with the pandemic. We know that from surveys of the Scottish Police Authority, Police Scotland's own surveys, from the work of the Independent Advisory Group on policing of COVID-19 regulations, which is chaired by John Scott QC. We know that they have come back with high levels of confidence in policing. In fact, the very existence of the Independent Advisory Group, chaired by John Scott, is a symbol of the openness and accountability of our police service in Scotland. The recent policing of the Black Lives Matter events shows this approach is the right one. There was a clear balance between the need for sensitive policing and the imperative to keep people safe. Both I and the Chief Constable made plain our views that people should not attend these events and that people should find other ways of protesting. But given that a significant number of people did gather in different parts of Scotland, the approach of Police Scotland reflected that balance very well. I also believe that the last few months have confirmed beyond all doubt that Scotland is most effectively policed by a single national service that is able to extend that common sense and empathetic approach across the whole country. The fundamentals of policing will not change over the coming months, although I would judge the specific role of the police will inevitably change as we move further out of lockdown and more of a focus on business as usual and core policing duties. Considering the shameful scenes of disorder Police Scotland had to deal with on Sunday and the separate horrific incident which left 2 officers injured and seriously injured, I hope everyone, and I certainly do across this chamber, renews their appreciation of the incredible job our police officers are doing to keep us safe. Let me now turn, Presiding Officer, to court business. In a short number of weeks, Scotland's courts have resumed many of their services. They've enabled virtual courts to be held in the Court of Session Inner House and High Court criminal appeals and remote hearings to be held in the Outer House. Sheriff courts and mental health tribunals have also had remote hearings taking place. New digital approaches have been introduced, allowing cases to be progressed across the Sheriff civil courts, and the All Scotland Personal Injury Court and commissary proceedings have been restarted through remote working. Protocols have been introduced in the courts to ensure physical distancing is maintained where attendance is required, with practice notes in place allowing remote representation to minimise attendance in courts by solicitors and Crown and Procurator fiscal staff. Alongside the hard work and ingenuity of the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service staff and of the legal profession, many of these innovative approaches could only be utilised because of the new legislative provisions that we have brought forward. And so it's also to Parliament's credit that such measures can be put in place so quickly. Going forward, the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service has announced a three-stage approach to restarting civil business, which prioritises urgent business and tackling the backlog. There are, as I'm sure members are aware, 15 hub sheriff courts operating, which are dealing with custodies and have been helping to reduce court sitting times. All sheriff courts reopened on the 2nd of June and have restarted processing local business this week. Last week, virtual summary trials were commenced in 2 locations, supporting future arrangements for summary trials to be conducted remotely. The Restarting Solemn Trials Working Group, led by Lord Justice Clark, Lady Dorian, has made swift progress in identifying the steps needed for jury trials to commence in Edinburgh and Glasgow in July. Although this will involve a very small number at first, the aim is to establish a sustainable approach that can allow as many trials as possible to progress, consistent with a fair justice system, while protecting the health of all those involved. If I can turn to prisons, Presiding Officer, in terms of the prison service, SPS has taken rapid and responsive action to ensure that physical distancing and public health protocols have been met, putting in place a robust plan to manage COVID-19 and to prevent its spread. I would hope members across the chamber would join with me in thanking our hard-working prison officers and indeed staff for the incredible job they've done to prevent a COVID-19 crisis in our prisons. At its peak, we had approximately 100 individuals self-isolating, with a number of positive cases confirmed. As of last night, there was no confirmed positive cases of COVID-19 in Scottish prisons and just 9 individuals self-isolating across 5 establishments. This is a significant achievement by our prison and health staff. As we see lockdown measures start to ease in our wider communities, the prison service is developing a phased approach to the easing of restrictions right across the estate, while ensuring the operational stability and safety and well-being of everybody in our prisons. In terms of family contact, we continue to recognise the impact of the restrictions in our prisons and the impact that has particularly on families. Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons has implemented a remote monitoring framework and inspection liaison visits to ensure oversight and monitoring of conditions in prisons. But as I say, we recognise very much the effect and the impact that the suspension of visits has had on families. And the prison service has been working hard to introduce alternatives for maintaining vital family contact. Following the laying of amended prison rules in Parliament earlier this week, the first virtual visits by family and friends took place yesterday for some of those in custody at Pullman, Corton Vale and Shotts. We anticipate that virtual visits will be available in all of our prisons by the end of the month. In addition, restricted mobile phones are being introduced in Corton Vale and Pullman this week, and then across the entire estate, with the exception of HMP Kilmarnock, which is implementing an in-cell landline solution over the next month or so as another way of enabling vital family contact during this difficult time. The prison service will ensure implementation of virtual visits and mobile phones is done in a way which is practical, safe and swift as possible for those in our custody, their families and indeed those in the wider community. The prison population, which as members will be aware, was of course of particular concern before the pandemic. That is reduced by around 15% since March to under 7,000, largely as a result of downturn in court business, but obviously, of course, aided by the early release arrangements put in place as well. This was completed on schedule on the 1st of June and saw a total of 348 prisoners released early. However, in light of continuing arrivals of new remand prisoners and the gradual reopening of the courts, we must continue to monitor the prison population and ensure that its reduction is not short-lived. The key aims of the early release process to take necessary and proportionate action to support the safe operation of prisons and to protect the health and well-being of those who live and work in them remain very much our priority. In the interest of brevity, I'll conclude shortly, Presiding Officer, but just to make, I think, important reference to the fact that all of us, of course, have at the forefront of our mind, in particular, victims and survivors of domestic abuse. And I want to reassure victims of crime, of all crime, that action will continue to be taken against perpetrators of crime, and they will continue to be brought to justice. But I think it's worth noting that in the calls that I have with the Chief Constable multiple times a week, I'm certainly reassured by Police Scotland's commitment, as well as our support organisations' commitment, to do what we can to support those who are in a difficult position at home in relation to domestic abuse. We also have a focus on cybercrime, and we know that serious organised crime groups have been looking to exploit the current COVID pandemic, and we are making sure that we have put our effort in that regard. So in conclusion, Presiding Officer, I'd like to assure this Parliament and the people of Scotland that the justice system is continuing to operate, and we continue to support our citizens through this time as we navigate our way at lockdown. I think members will no doubt join me in paying tribute to the hard work undertaken by all in the justice system in supporting a safe, just and resilient Scotland.
The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in his statement. Can I say to members I have absolutely no additional time, and we are already running a bit late, so I doubt very much if we will get to all the questioners. However, I first of all call Liam Kerr.
I'll try and be quick. Thank you, Presiding Officer. So I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance like this statement and echo his thanks, of course, to the police prison officers and all those he mentioned in his introductory remarks and throughout. I wish to explore three areas. Firstly, it's vital that the courts are up and running again as soon as possible. The number of cases that took over 6 months to go from caution or charge to verdict was shocking even before the pandemic. And of course, steps had to be taken to protect public health, but victims shouldn't have to wait any longer than necessary. So can I ask firstly why the Cabinet Secretary has not announced detailed plans today to create additional court capacity to help with this catch-up? Secondly, on policing, I have a written answer from the Lord Advocate confirming that the SPF's call for those who cough or spit on police officers not to be released from custody before trial is a policy matter for the Justice Secretary, not the Crown Office. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary why he will not take that decision? And finally, the Cabinet Secretary repeats his long-standing aim to put more criminals onto historically under-resourced community orders. Now, I've seen data from local councils showing that, understandably, face-to-face contact with offenders in the community has plummeted during the pandemic. So what assurances has he sought from councils that public safety has not been and will not be compromised by reduced monitoring?
Hamza Yousaf.
Can I thank Liam Kerr for his questions and also, of course, note that he has had a consistent interest in the matters that he's raised, and I appreciate the tone in which he asked his questions. In relation to the courts, what I would say in relation to detailed plans, I think those detailed plans have been put forward rightly by the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service. A cursory glance at their website would show you that three-staged approach that I mentioned, but if he hasn't seen that link, I'll make sure that it's forwarded on to him in due course. He does hit upon a really important point, which is we have existing court capacity with physical distancing in place, which will only take us so far. We need to go further. There is simply just no doubt about that if we want to make inroads into that backlog. So I can confirm the very radical and innovative solutions are being explored. For example, looking at commercial premises. Can we set up temporary courts, for example, to deal with that backlog? So really, out-of-the-box, radical, innovative thinking being explored. It's right that those decisions have been taken by the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service, and of course those details are up on their website. On the second point that he raised, I do have the PQ that he refers to, and I have a slightly different interpretation to him than the one that he articulates. The Lord Advocate makes it very, very clear that, of course, when it comes to the law on arrest and police custody, that, of course, that has to be consistent with Article 5 of the European Convention on Human Rights. I'm certain that Liam Kerr would agree with that. And in his PQ, the Lord Advocate then goes on to say that a proposal that all persons arrested for coughing and spitting on police officers during the COVID-19 pandemic should be automatically detained, this is the important bit, would not be consistent with this statutory framework. Now, Liam Kerr forgot to mention that point. And so important because what I'm sure he's not suggesting is that anybody, be it the Crown or indeed anybody else, looks to go against a statutory framework. So I think that answers that question. In terms of the community orders, I'll raise this question as I often do with COSLA. I have a regular engagement with Councillor Kelly Parry. What I would say about community orders is we do want to get them up and running as safely and swiftly as possible. By their very nature, that can be difficult in a group dynamic. But what I would say is I take on board the points that he makes around safety, and I will raise them again with COSLA during our next conversation.
James Kelly.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of his statement. I echo his comments in complimenting those in the police, prison and court sector who are continuing to work in very difficult circumstances to keep people safe. As we emerge slowly out of lockdown, keeping our communities safe and protecting people is absolutely essential. To achieve that, we need clarity of public messages. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary 2 questions? What consultation has there been with Police Scotland ahead of the Phase 2 announcement tomorrow to ensure that there's clarity about what is in guidance and what is in the law? And in relation to the restarting of jury trials, can I ask what provision there is for COVID-19 testings to give some assurance to jurors who would potentially be empanelled?
Hamza Yousaf.
I can thank James Kelly for his questions and also the constructive manner in which he has not just raised these issues but has been raising issues consistently related to the justice sector for a number of weeks and months. In terms of his first question, can I give him an absolute assurance there's very detailed consultation that has taken place with Police Scotland. That's happened at ministerial level, so I speak regularly to both the Chief Constable, also to his DCCs, DCC Malcolm Graham, who's in the lead for Operation Tala, but also some of his other DCCs as well. So there's been a ministerial to Chief Constable and DCC relationship, which has been focused on Phase 2 for a number of weeks now, but also at official level, there has been a lot of detailed discussion as well with Police Scotland, because he's absolutely right, there should be absolute consistency and alignment of message in relation to what is in guidance and what is in regulation. But what I would say to James Kelly, and I think I referred to this in my statement, that as restrictions begin to ease, we will no doubt see the police revert more to core policing duties and public order powers and so on and so forth, as you would expect, as opposed to perhaps the powers within the regulations. But I think that's probably a very obvious point to make. In relation to the restarting of jury trials, I should say the work that is being done on this is being led by Lady Dorian, Lord Justice Clark. She has Public Health Scotland advising her in relation to that work, and therefore I would expect that testing, well, I know testing because it's an issue that I've raised in my last conversation with the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service. I know testing is an issue that's been actively explored when it comes to the resumption of jury trials. We have the capacity there. What I would say to James Kelly, I know again he'll understand this, is that of course testing asymptomatic individuals only gives you a certain assurance at that point in time, and we know that of course jury trials could last, if not for over a week, at least certainly for a number of days. But to give an assurance that testing question that he asks is one that's being actively explored.
We'll move now to open questions. As I say, I have a lot of people. If you'd make sure you've pressed your button. I call Rona Mackay to be followed by Maurice Corey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. What's the Cabinet Secretary's response to the 2018-19 Scottish Crime and Justice Survey, which shows that people are less likely to experience crime compared to a decade ago and that people feel safer in their communities?
Hamza Yousaf.
That's a very positive survey, and I would urge members to have a look at it. The 5,500 adults surveyed for the 18-19 survey. This was obviously pre the pandemic, and shows some really positive trends. Crime overall down in a decade, violent crime almost halved in a decade, people less likely to be victims of crime as they are now compared to a decade ago. What I'll also say was a really interesting statistic, and we don't know whether this is a trend yet or just an outlier, but actually the likelihood of being a victim of crime if you're in one of the most deprived areas in Scotland seems to be of no statistical difference if you're in any of the other areas of Scotland that are not the most deprived. So some interesting statistics, but clearly also, as you'd imagine, some areas of concern in relation to the reporting of crime as well. So lots of good detail in there, and I'd encourage all members to look at that detail of the Scottish Crime and Justice Survey.
Maurice Corrie, to be followed by Daniel Johnson.
Deputy Presiding Officer, thank you. I note that the Cabinet Secretary addresses in general terms in his report and his statement the support to victims of crime. Can he give specific details as to the level of mental health support being given just now to victims of crime, particularly in respect to the protracted period of an anxious wait for them due to the current emergency until the judicial process is fully up and running again?
That is an important question that Maurice Corrie asked. We've given additional funding to Victim Support Scotland, the national organisation that, of course, works with victims, but also we've given additional funding to the likes of Scottish Women's Aid, Rape Crisis Scotland and Assist, who work specifically with survivors and victims of domestic abuse. Because, as I've mentioned already, while home may well be a safe haven for Maurice Corrie and I, and for others, home is not a safe haven for everybody. So there is a range of funding that we have given, additionality to funding that we have given since the beginning of this pandemic to those victims' organisations. If there is more that we can do, then of course my door remains open to those organisations who I have regular engagement with.
Daniel Johnson, followed by John Finney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary is absolutely right to pay tribute to our police officers for keeping us safe. Back in April, the Police Federation raised concerns about the safety of Type 2 surgical masks which had been issued to police officers, but were reassured that FFP3 masks would be delivered. Can the Cabinet Secretary update the Chamber as to whether or not those masks were delivered, and indeed the number that have been issued to police officers?
You forgive me, I don't have the figure of the number of FFP3 masks that have been delivered, but certainly there seems to be no concerns that have been raised to me about FFP3 masks in recent conversations or consultations with both the Federation, Police Federation, or indeed with Police Scotland directly, but I'm happy to look back into that. In relation to the issue around Type 2 surgical masks, you'll know that this is now an issue that has been referred to the Health and Safety Executive. I won't make a prejudgment on that. I have always been confident that Police Scotland have been aligned with the public health guidance as per Health Protection Scotland, but we'll wait for HSE's judgment in that regard.
Joining us remotely is John Finney, who will be followed by Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I note the Cabinet Secretary's comments on the prison estate, and I, of course, thank the prison staff for their hard work. The Cabinet Secretary may be aware that the Children and Young People's Commissioner has written a very concerning letter to the Justice Committee advising on the international human rights framework, which clearly prohibits the use of solitary confinement for children, recognises the damaging effect it can have on physical and mental health. Cabinet Secretary may be aware the Commissioner understands that some children and young people in young offenders institutes are currently being confined in their cells for up to 23 hours a day, with those showing symptoms of the virus isolated in their cells for 24 hours a day. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm whether this intolerable situation has occurred? If so, whether it continues? And most importantly, how quickly the Scottish Government will remedy it?
Hamza Yousaf.
Can I thank John Finney for the question that he asks? As of today, there shouldn't be anybody self-isolating within our young offenders institutes because the numbers that are low, there are 9 people self-isolating across 5 prisons and they do not include young offenders institutes, so it shouldn't be the case that they're being held in self-isolation or solitary confinement for public health reasons. There may be other reasons why that is the case. But I equally share not just John Finney's concerns, but the concerns of the Commissioner. What I would say to John Finney is there is, despite lockdown measures in place, there is a robust monitoring framework put forward by Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons. And of course, in terms of the detail of what the Commissioner has raised, I will look at that specifically. But of course, he will recognise in the early days of this pandemic some very extreme measures had to be taken that we would never think to implement in normal times, but because of the extremity of the situation we're dealing with, that action had to be taken for no other reason than for public health. But I take his broader points and I will take them away and look at them in more detail after this session.
Fulton McGregor, to be followed by Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Given that lockdown has led to many victims of domestic violence being exposed to an even greater risk, can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, are there any plans to further roll out and indeed even expand the Caledonian programme and other such initiatives to tackle the scourge of domestic abuse?
Hamza Yousaf.
Well, Fulton McGregor will know, because I think he and I have discussed this before, that additional funding from the Scottish Government has allowed the Caledonian project to be rolled out across even more local authorities. I'm a big believer in the effects of that programme. I think it's an excellent programme, and I would like to see a further rollout of that. What has been the work that has been undertaken during the pandemic has been to see if they can get a version of the Caledonian programme that is a one-to-one programme. He'll know the Caledonian programme is usually a group-based programme, and I believe that this week the Caledonian programme is looking for that that sign-off, that accreditation for that one-to-one programme. So if I can give them assurance, if they get that sign-off, of course, if local authorities are interested in that Caledonian programme, in having that resource available to them, then of course I'll look at that with an absolute open mind.
Joining us remotely is Liam MacArthur, who will be followed by Gordon Lyndhurst. Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I too pay tribute to everyone working across our justice system, where services and systems have been radically reconfigured over recent weeks. But can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what action he's taken since I raised with him last week the concerns of Scottish Women's Aid about refuge capacity due to an increase in requests coinciding with pressures brought about by social distancing and difficulties in being able to move individuals onto more permanent homes?
Hamza Yousaf.
Well, the issue has been raised not just with the Housing Minister, but also with housing officials and liaising directly with Scottish Women's Aid. I had a conversation during our Victims Task Force with Scottish Women's Aid around, of course, the victims and survivors of domestic abuse. I will come back to Liam MacArthur. I know he did raise this issue with me last week. Once the Housing Minister and I have had a further conversation around refuge space, but be in no doubt whatsoever that where there are issues around refuge space, then we are both collectively committed to tackling that.
Gordon Lyndhurst, to be followed by Claire Baker.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary will recall I asked him almost 2 months ago on 21st April about the number of jury trials that could proceed. Cabinet Secretary, what is the timeline for clearing the backlog which has been building for months now and will continue to build until resumption in mid-July?
Hamza Yousaf.
What I say to Gordon Lyndhurst is he knows that there are detailed plans not just underway, but there is a working group looking at this specific issue led by the Lord Justice Clark. There are no easy answers. If there was a magic wand, a click of the fingers, a silver bullet that could be applied to this issue to deal with the backlog, then not only would we have found it, England and Wales would have found it, and of course every other common law jurisdiction such as New Zealand, Australia, Canada would have found it. They have not. Everybody is dealing with this issue. Everybody is working through this issue. Everybody understands that despite our best efforts, there will be a backlog that will have to be worked through. There is no easy way of me saying this, but there is a backlog that will be very difficult for the accused. It will be difficult for the witnesses. It will be difficult for victims of crime. We will explore radical and bold solutions, as I've already mentioned in my answer to Liam Kerr, whether that's, for example, setting up temporary courts to work through the backlog, whether it's asking retired judges and indeed sheriffs to come back onto the bench. We will ask and explore every avenue possible. But if he's expecting me to come with a magic solution that no other country has managed to find, that will give him a reassurance that the backlog will not be difficult to get through, I'm afraid I just cannot do that. These are serious matters being given serious consideration across the legal profession, across victims' organisations, across government, and I can give him an assurance that there is not a day that goes by where I am not in discussions about addressing that backlog.
Claire Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary will know that the local delivery of justice is important for victims and witnesses and is also a practical consideration. The Cabinet Secretary talked about the possibility of renting commercial premises for temporary courts to help clear the backlog. But I appreciate this is a difficult matter, but could you give an indication when we might see jury trials resume in Dunfermline and Kirkcaldy?
Hamza Yousaf.
Again, this was work that has been taken forward by Lady Doreen as part of the working group at resuming jury trials. It is the plan to resume jury trials first and foremost, as you'll know, in the High Courts in Glasgow and Edinburgh, and there's different solutions for each of those High Courts, and that would be in July. So, of course, some of the victims of crime that come from the region that Claire Baker represents may well be serviced by that. But I have to be very frank with members, it will be a very small number that will begin in the initial phase, of course, understandably so. I think too, it will be cases that will involve a small number of witnesses in the first instance as well. So that work will continue, but I can give an absolute assurance to Claire Baker, as I've just done to Gordon Lyndhurst. Nobody wants to elongate this delay any further than it has to be. Nobody wants to have victims in particular, nor the accused, of course, waiting any longer than they have to for a trial date. So we'll continue to work at the best pace that we possibly can in this regard.
And the last question, a quick one, please, from Ruth Maguire.
Presiding Officer, regarding virtual visits, given the importance of family contact, what's being done to ensure that no families are excluded due to lack of access to appropriate technology? And can I ask that families in Ayrshire are able to access this service at Kilmarnock Prison as soon as possible, please?
Hamza Yousaf.
Well, in terms of Kilmarnock Prison, the member will be aware it's one of 2 private prisons that we have in Scotland. HMP Kilmarnock have decided not to introduce mobile phones, but instead they'll develop their own in-cell telephony option, which will provide similar functionality in terms of enabling contact with family and friends. In terms of virtual visits, which Ruth Maguire asked for in terms of HMP Kilmarnock, their bookings are scheduled to open there on Monday the 22nd of June, with visits actually starting on Thursday the 25th of June, and I'll make sure the details of that are sent to Ruth Maguire.
That concludes questions on the Justice Sector response to recovery and renewal, and apologies to John McAlpine and Alistair Allen for being unable to accommodate their questions. We'll now move on to the next item of business.